Good morning, everybody. We're about to begin. I ask you to take your seats. Is there a little feedback here? Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. There's coffee and light breakfast over there. And nice to see people here this morning. Let me bring up to the podium our President and Dean, Anthony Crowell, to welcome everybody.
Thanks so much, Ross. Appreciate it. And it is wonderful to see all of you this morning. I hope you are well. And welcome to our City Law Breakfast. We have such a wonderful program today featuring New York Inspector General Lucy Lang. I'm Anthony Crowell, the Dean and President here at New York Law School. I'm also the Director of the Center for New York City and State Law. And I just want to recognize my wonderful partner here, our founding director of the Center for New York City and State Law, Ross Sandler, who's done an extraordinary job not only building the center, but most recognizably building this City Law Breakfast series, which we are so proud of. We're honored to have Lucy Lang with us today for this 203rd City Law Breakfast. And it's particularly important to us, as I always say at these events, we're so proud of what our law school produces in terms of public service lawyers. 1/3 of our graduating class each year goes into public service and public interest careers, mainly in New York City and state. And certainly the center has expanded a variety of programming recently, including evolving the way these city law breakfasts are presented, as well as new candidate debates, policy forums, book talks, and of course, timely programs on critical issues facing our city and state, including our new series on housing. At its core, the center is a place that helps to educate the public on, and it celebrates also the 4 pillars of good government: integrity, transparency, accountability, and independence. And I think on all scores, our speaker today understands and represents them. Those are core values of what she does. I just want to also quickly recognize a few people in the room. We have Jocelyn Strauber, who was most recently our Department of Investigation Commissioner for the city. Thank you for your extraordinary work. And Asam Rehman, who is a distinguished adjunct professor here, was commissioner at the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, and is about to embark on a new position in the Mamdani administration as commissioner of the Business Integrity Commission. Congratulations. And I should also mention he was first Deputy Inspector General for the Police Inspector General for the City of New York. We are very excited to have this event, particularly as we think about our nation's 250th anniversary and the work that New York Law School has been doing in advancing civics education. I think renewing our commitment to civics education is essential, of course, to the continued strength of our democracy. And I just want to acknowledge that Inspector General Lang last September was a key partner, planner, and speaker for the inaugural Constitution and Citizenship Day Summit at New York Law School, which featured a keynote discussion with U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor and many panels and discussions with a wide range of leaders, educators, and advocates. The Inspector General shares a deep commitment to civics education because she knows firsthand that upholding integrity and ethics is key to retaining and restoring trust in our democratic institutions and thus promoting and defending the rule of law. So I'm grateful for her leadership, particularly at an incredibly challenging and complex time in our nation and state. So I'm going to hand the program back over to Ross, who will formally introduce the Inspector General, and we'll look forward to a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Well, good morning again. I'm Professor Ross Sandler, happy to be here and had been with the center from its beginning. We are delighted to have Lucy Lang here at the 203rd breakfast. She was born in New York, graduated from Swarthmore College, earned her law degree from Columbia, began her legal career at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office under Robert Morgenthau, and then under Cyrus Vance, where she held executive positions. On leaving the district attorney's office, she turned to the public sector, in effect, the not-for-profit, working to improve the criminal justice system. And then in 2021 ran for district attorney against our colleague, Alvin Bragg, And then after that race, Governor Hochul saw talent and appointed her as the 11th Inspector General of New York State. As the Inspector General, she's led many investigations concentrating on workers' compensation, welfare programs, gaming industry, and the state's correction system. She has also, and I thought this was very interesting, been a prolific writer of thoughtful opinion pieces. In 2025 alone, she published articles on gun safety, food assistance, the firing of the federal inspector generals, problems of long-term care for the aging, lessons about learning disabilities, abuses within the workers' compensation system, fraud prevention, and a nice comment on the death of President Jimmy Carter. She has long made integrity the hallmark of her tenure at the Inspector General. And you notice on your table, she's also a good politician. There's a lot, all this stuff is from the Inspector General's office. I look at this and I think, we don't have anything for you today. I'm embarrassed to say, but she does, the magnifying glasses and the pens and the do right. And this is important. This is a motto. And if you look at her annual report, which is also on the table, which reminds me, we have to do an annual report. It says, she declares that her goal is to bring the public along with her mission of public integrity. And then to underscore that commitment, she is pictured on the second page of the annual report wearing a T-shirt. And the T-shirt has this motto on it. And this is what I would call a personal commitment to doing right and to integrity in government. We are delighted to welcome Lucy Lang to this podium.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you all for being here, and good morning. There we go. The Continental Congress issued a resolution after the Battle of Valley Forge, describing Inspector General Friedrich Wilhelm Ludhoff Gerhard Augustin Louis Ferrer von Steuben as that illustrious stranger who has so generously undertaken to aid us in our struggle for liberty. Illustrious stranger, used to refer to this underrecognized founding father, is an apt term for the often unknown role of inspectors general, sometimes called the most important public servants you've never heard of. As New York State Inspector General, at a time when public trust in government is at historic lows, and indeed the foundation of our democracy is under attack, I see this 250th anniversary of the signing of Declaration of Independence as a call to action, a call to bring the public into public integrity. And that public must include vulnerable and overlooked members of our communities and our country. IG von Steuben, a Prussian military leader who George Washington appointed IG to train, inspect, and develop standards for the Continental Army, is credited with turning the ragtag force into a professional military by curtailing the prevalent graft and waste undermining the war effort. He went on to codify these standards in the Blue Book, which remains a foundational document for American military operations. Killing me here. There we go. And there it is in the archives of the New York State Parks and Historic Preservation. Over time in America, IGs have expanded into the civilian side of government, with more than 74 federal IGs investigating fraud, waste, and abuse in various federal agencies, and with hundreds more serving as state IGs with a range of jurisdictional authorities, mandates, and powers, and with various legal protections to enable their independence, ranging from staggered terms to good cause for removal requirements. But as a general matter, all nonpartisan watchdogs are charged with identifying and preventing fraud and corruption, and are granted the expected investigative powers, access to documents and witnesses and the entities they oversee, subpoena power, surveillance authority, the ability to take sworn statements. 40 years ago this year, former Governor Mario Cuomo established the New York State Inspector General by executive order, which was later codified in law by Governor George Pataki, and which has since grown to include additional authorities, including welfare IG and the workers' compensation fraud IG. I was appointed the 11th IG in the fall of 2021 in the wake of the resignation of then Governor Andrew Cuomo. It was a time when New Yorkers were rightly angry and distrustful of state government, and some, if they had even heard of the New York State IG, were skeptical about the purported independence of the office. This environment of distrust made clear that the work of the office had to extend beyond undertaking investigations and developing standards to prevent fraud. Having served as an ADA here in Manhattan for many years, I had long believed that prosecutions are a tool of district attorneys, not the goal, that safe and thriving communities are the goal. And similarly, as I undertook the role of IG, I realized that investigations are not the goal, but are the tool of a watchdog, and the goal is a government that operates with integrity. While investigations are, of course, a critical part of that, a government that operates with integrity must communicate about the work to the public so that government can earn people's trust. And especially facing the crisis in state government during which I was appointed, it was vital to bring the public into the public integrity, which included focusing resources on programs designed to support the most vulnerable New Yorkers. So some changes were in order. In breaking with past practice, I do not sit as a member of the governor's cabinet alongside the commissioners of the many agencies who are under my authority to investigate. I have also separated our office's primary operations, including information technology and hiring and HR, from those agencies under our jurisdiction. I have ended the practice of seeking gubernatorial approval prior to issuing public reports, and my office has also implemented major transparency measures, including committing to publishing the letters that include our post-investigation recommendations, retroactively publishing decades worth of previously unpublished materials, developing a social media presence across platforms, opening a data portal, enumerating the sources and resolutions of allegations we review, and I've hired directors of training and external affairs. It was nearly 5 years ago that I implemented these changes to improve our independence as an agency, and I could not have imagined then how bleak the landscape would ultimately become for IGs. Last January, consistent with his campaign promises and with Project 2025, on the first Friday night of his second term, President Trump fired 18 federal inspectors general in flagrant violation of the law requiring 30-day notice to Congress and requiring enumeration of detailed and case-specific substantive rationale for any such terminations. Now, this firing of IGs was not wholly unprecedented, but the lack of process and the muted response certainly were. Indeed, in response to President Ronald Reagan's 1981 firing of federal IGs, bipartisan pushback led President Reagan to reinstate many. And when President Obama removed the AmeriCorps Inspector General, the action drew widespread bipartisan criticism about its legality. To the contrary, it was clear that the Friday night mass purge in 2025 was specifically designed to undermine democratic guardrails. That point was hit home further just 3 weeks later when President Trump paused foreign assistance programs and stripped resources from the U.S. Agency for International Development. And the USAID IG did precisely what his job required. He published a report disclosing the results of an independent analysis of the costs of those cuts, including that they left aid programs vulnerable to terrorism. The president immediately retaliated by firing the USAID IG. These illegal IG firings, the attention to which waned with the news cycle, should not have come as a surprise, and not only because it was previewed during the campaign, but because when you want to rob a bank, the first thing you do is figure out what to do with the guards. And the federal IGs are among the most important guardians of the federal fiscal system. They saved taxpayers approximately $94 billion in 2024 alone, a $26 return on every dollar spent. Perhaps emboldened by a climate that permits the politicization of these intentionally nonpartisan institutions, state and local IGs have not been immune from the assault on their independence. The first City of Atlanta IG resigned after being stripped of investigative authority by the very city council, whose experiences with corruption led them to establish the IG's office. In Baltimore, the Inspector General has faced ongoing disputes and legal challenges related to her oversight authority, including access to records and subpoena power. And of course, here in New York City, the Justice Department dismissed corruption charges against the previous mayor that resulted from an extensive investigation by the Department of Investigations. But in addition to the financial implications of firing and undermining watchdogs, and in addition to the catastrophic impact on public confidence in government, there are huge human costs to these threats to IG independence. Because part of IG's jobs is to make government work better for those who need it most. My experiences as IG, as an educator, as an ADA in Manhattan, and indeed even as a law student, have led me to the view that in efforts to put the public into public integrity, the notion of the public must very intentionally include the most vulnerable members of our communities. So I'd like to share a bit about my own path to becoming IG, which informs our work at the New York State IG. My decision to pursue a career in the criminal legal system came from a tragedy when I was in law school, when a close childhood friend was found murdered in the trunk of a car in a parking lot at a Metro North station. The investigation revealed that her brother, suffering from schizophrenia, had shot and killed her during a crisis mental health episode. In the wake of this tragedy, I watched a parallel tragedy unfold in the failures of the system to serve and support their family, both in their role as the family of the victim and in their role as the family of the person charged with the murder. It was a desire to be part of changing that system from the inside that led me to the Manhattan DA's office, where I served as a homicide prosecutor. The content I'm going to discuss for the next few minutes is difficult, so please feel free to step away if you need to. And so it was as a homicide prosecutor that I found myself on homicide call on a snowy Super Bowl Sunday night in 2015, and I picked up a murder investigation. Just as bars were letting out for the night, 2 masked gunmen came out from behind parked cars on Upper Broadway and opened fire. Their bullets hit 5 people, seriously injuring 4 and killing 28-year-old Shadell Graham, the father of a 3-year-old. Over the course of the following months, I worked closely with the NYPD and community members to identify those masked gunmen through a complicated set of circumstantial evidence, including surveillance footage, cell site data, social media information, cooperating witnesses, direct messages, and forensic evidence. Newly apparent myself during the months of this grueling investigation, I became close to Shadell's mother, Yvonne, who showed incredible fortitude in the wake of that unspeakable tragedy. And it was with her assistance that ultimately the 2 men who killed Shadell were identified and indicted, and I tried the case against them over the course of 4 weeks, calling more than 40 witnesses, and a jury returned a verdict of guilty. The morning after the verdict, I called Yvonne to ask her how she was, and she said that she had slept through the night for the first time since her son was killed, but that all she could think about were the moms of the men who had just been convicted of murdering her son. And in her own words,
I was so relieved that we did win the verdict, but I also was empathetic to the other mother. No matter what, both moms lost a child. She lost her child to the system, and I lost my child to the streets.
Yvonne's compassion made me realize how little I really knew about the criminal legal system outside of my own small piece of it, how far away I'd come from entering the profession wanting to see things from both sides. So interested in spending more time in prisons, but in an environment that would foster honest conversation, I was inspired to create a seminar-style class in prison. With the district attorney's support, in collaboration with the Columbia Center for Justice, I created a class which was comprised of half Manhattan assistant district attorneys and half incarcerated students, which would meet for several hours weekly for the course of a semester at a prison in Queens, after which the incarcerated students would receive college credits, the prosecutors would receive CLE credits, and the class would present their final projects, jointly authored policy recommendations, to the DA and the prison commissioner. On the very first day of our very first class, I met Jarrell, who had served 6 years in prison, and he was being released from prison before the second session, scheduled for the next week. He told me that he wanted to complete the course, even though he was going home. And I told him that I would be happy to meet him up at Columbia and to help him with the course materials so that he could get the college credit. But he said, no disrespect, but it's not about you, and it's actually not about the credits. I want to be in this classroom, in this prison. So he petitioned the then DOCS commissioner to allow him to come back into the classroom each week as a free man, setting the tone for a program that now continues today under DA Bragg's leadership. Here's how Jarrell sees it.
When I look in the mirror today, I see a justice and education scholar at Columbia University, a youth mentor, an activist, and a future New York State Senator. I see all of that in a man who spent a quarter of his life in state prison. 6 years to be exact, starting as a teenager on Rikers Island for an act that nearly cost a man his life. But what got me from there to here wasn't the punishment I faced as a teenager in adult prison, or the harshness of our legal system. Instead, it was a learning environment of a classroom that introduced me to something I didn't think was possible for me or our justice system as a whole. A few weeks before my release on parole, a counselor encouraged me to enroll in a new college course being offered in a prison. It was called Inside Criminal Justice. That seems pretty straightforward though, right? Well, it turns out the class will be made up of 8 incarcerated men and 8 assistant district attorneys. Columbia University psychology professor Geraldine Downey and Manhattan assistant DA Lucy Lang co-taught the course, and it was the first of its kind. I can honestly say this wasn't how I imagined starting college. My mind was blown from day one. I assumed all the prosecutors in the room would be white. But I remember walking into the room on the first day of class and seeing 3 black prosecutors and thinking to myself, wow, being a black prosecutor, that's a thing. By the end of the first session, I was all in.
Jarrell came home and graduated from Columbia, and he's now pursuing his PhD at NYU. He has a happy and healthy partnership and a baby. And many thanks to Dean Crowell and others in the room for including Jarrell in the important work that we did last fall around civic education here at New York Law School. It's thanks to Jarrell and others. It's thanks to him and others of my incarcerated students over several years of teaching in the state prisons that when I became IG, it was clear that we needed to increase the resources directed towards our oversight of the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, which, while only one of the more than 100 state agencies for whom we serve as watchdog, constituted more than half of the allegations of fraud and abuse that we received each year. And so I want to bring you a little bit inside of our work at the offices of the Inspector General. In my first year,
When I look in the mirror today, I see a justice and education.
we'll just do it again. In my first year as IG, I visited all 42 of the then operating state prisons, and I met with leadership, staff, and incarcerated New Yorkers, ultimately creating a dedicated team of investigators, auditors, and lawyers whose job is to take a trauma-informed approach to the flood of allegations we receive about that department. And I'm pleased that one of my brilliant team members in that area is with me today. It is thanks to having brought these members of the public into our work of public integrity that our work has included investigations into the misuse of drug testing that was resulting in incarcerated people being sent to solitary confinement and denied visitation and parole. That investigation ultimately led the department to end the use of solitary confinement as a penalty for a positive drug test. Conversations with incarcerated New Yorkers also led us to investigate and publicly report about provisions of the corrections officers' union contract that incentivize abuse of the workers' compensation system, contributing to understaffing and undermining educational, vocational, and recreational programming, and which contributed to the widespread and mounting crisis we've seen in New York State's prisons over the past year, which heartbreakingly included the murders of Robert Brooks and Nantwi Messiah at the hands of correction officers. And that is why we continue to investigate DOC staff accused of corruption and wrongdoing. The human impact of our work has been evident in many other areas of our practice as well. Several years ago, my office investigated 2 state agencies for their failure to comply with their own domestic violence workplace policies. This investigation was prompted by a specific tragedy. And before I describe it, please know that if you or someone you know is suffering from domestic violence, there are resources available 24/7 through opdv.ny.gov. A state employee, a woman who had given more than 30 years of her life to service to New York State, came forward at work and disclosed to senior officials at her agency that she was a victim of domestic violence. She named her abuser. She explained that she had been using her state-issued phone to document the abuse because her husband was monitoring her personal phone. She told them that she needed the records from her state-issued phone in order to seek a protective order. But rather than being met with resources, she was met with disciplinary action against her for misuse of her state-issued device. Kicked off a lengthy disciplinary process against her. Almost a year later, her husband killed her and himself. I will not tell you that a different response from her agency would have saved her life. Of course, we can't know that. What we can know is that the system failed to respond the way it was supposed to, and the consequences were catastrophic. New York State has modeled domestic violence workplace policies, which exist precisely because the state recognizes that domestic violence doesn't stay at home. It follows people to work, and workplaces have both the opportunity and the obligation to respond. So since 2008, state agencies have been required to adopt these policies, and both agencies at question in this case had done so. Policies existed, but they were not implemented. Our investigation found that senior employees at the agencies had little, if any, knowledge of that policy. They didn't know who their designated liaison expert was, despite working alongside that person regularly. When the liaison went out on extended leave, the agency went for more than 6 months without a functioning trained replacement. And when the employee in this case came forward, the institutional response was not to ask, what does she need and how do we help her? It was to ask, what is the process for misuse of the phone and how do we follow that? So process in this case was had dangerous consequences, and the victim herself captured that failure with a clarity that has stayed with me. In an email to her supervisor while this was unfolding, she wrote, "It is so sad that they beat the horn about agencies protecting domestic violence victims, but when it actually comes to practice, they're not even willing to consider anything." And that sentence is a precise diagnosis of a particular kind of institutional failure that we are concerned with at the offices of the Inspector General, the gap between stated values and actual behavior, between policy and practice, between what an organization says that it stands for, and what it does when doing the right thing may require a departure from a routine or a decision between multiple conflicting protocols. And that gap is part of what oversight exists to find. And of course, finding it is only half the work. Our recommendations in that case were concrete and operational: to designate trained liaisons and ensure their identity is known throughout the agency, to take a trauma-informed approach to every person who discloses abuse, make training mandatory for every new hire, and require annual policy reviews and acknowledgements by everyone so that staff remain aware. These aren't aspirational commitments, they are trackable requirements. Prior to releasing the report, I spoke to the adult child of the woman who was killed. And he told me that knowing that her death would result in system change had finally brought him some measure of closure. So our work is a tiny piece in America's imperfect history of oversight. In his final letter as Commander-in-Chief of the Colonial Armies, then unaware that he would ultimately become president, George Washington wrote to IG von Steuben, "I wish to make use of this last moment of my public life to signify in the strongest terms my entire approbation of your conduct and to express my sense of the obligations the public is under to you for your faithful and meritorious services." In the 2.5 centuries since, IGs have grown and changed along with the country, but at their core, they have always had in common a nonpartisan, independent commitment to government that operates with integrity. And it's because the work of government matters so much to real people's everyday lives, including those people whose voices are often unheard, whether they are the beneficiaries of international humanitarian aid stripped of programming across the world, or people who've committed acts of violence and are confined out of sight in the prisons in our own backyards. It's because of them that inspectors general must bring the public into our work, by which I mean all members, and that the public must pay attention and speak out in response to the mounting threats to independent oversight. Thank you so much, Professor Sandler, Ben Max, Dean Crowell, for having me, to the New York Law School operations, facilities, and security staff, to my own colleagues for everything that they do. And to my colleagues in oversight, MTA IG Dan Court and former DOI Commissioner Jocelyn Stauber, and to esteemed fellow members of the National Association of Inspectors General who are here today. And many thanks to all of you for joining me this morning. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, and for the thoughtful comments, and also for the stories that were brought so much to life, and they were really remarkable. I watched the audience, and they really reacted. As you know, we have questions, and please come up. We'll do a Q&A. Before we do that, let me just say I forgot to thank our founding sponsors, Con Edison, Greenberg Traurig, and Verizon, and also the people who have given involuntary. You have stars on your nameplates. If you didn't, I'll come and put a star on right away. Okay, questions, please. You know the role. Microphone over there. Please go up. You know, if you don't ask questions, I'm going to have to ask the questions, and then I much prefer you all. And some of you have had experiences as Inspector General. She's opened a topic about what about Inspector Generals? What is the future? What's going on now with them? And I think that would be interesting to hear comments from this audience of people who have been familiar with these offices as to what kind of, what's the future hold, and what kind of things can we do with respect to Inspector Generals and the work that they do. So.
Okay. Lucy, do you think it's possible you can help me go after the New York State Labor Department, or should I say the New York State Slavery Department? They got me fired from 2 jobs in the 1990s.
I'm so sorry to hear what you have been through, and I would ask that if you have a specific complaint and allegation, you can report it to members of my team who are in the back corner. We'll be happy to intake it the way we intake every complaint, which is the best way to make sure that it gets reviewed thoroughly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Michael Myers, president of New York Civil Rights Coalition. My question is about public integrity with respect to government officials in particular. We've had a mayor that was up on federal charges, which the federal government absolved him of. They withdrew the prosecution. I want to know, where was the State Department, where was the state agencies, the public integrity agencies of the Inspector General's office? Why in a system we have dual sovereignty, federal level, state level, why aren't there prosecutions brought by the state against police officials, mayors, etc., who violate the law? And you allow the government, the federal government, to prosecute, but you don't prosecute.
Thank you for the important work that you do, Mr. Myers. There are so many questions in what you just asked, and I think that probably many people in this room agree that the dismissal of charges against the former mayor was a real travesty. With respect to dual sovereignty, it's perhaps a question for some of the founding fathers who I referenced. Look, there are good things and bad things about the way our system is built in our very large country. And sometimes I feel frustration to be limited to my jurisdictional mandate, which just includes the state executive agencies. And I'm fortunate to work alongside colleagues who have a comparable commitment and mandate with respect to the federal agencies and the city agencies. But we do work very closely with state, local, and federal prosecutors' offices when we determine through the course of a comprehensive investigation that criminal charges are warranted to make sure that people are held accountable. Yeah.
Thank you for this morning's remarks. They were really insightful. On this topic and this idea of bringing public into public integrity, could you say a little more about what you wish that oversight offices could do to achieve that? And in answering that, can you comment a little on this delicate balance that oversight offices have to strike? Because perhaps the more public you become, is there a risk that becoming too public would make the office look somewhat political, and that would compromise the integrity of the office? And so what are the things that need to be done to achieve this goal of bringing the public into public integrity, and where are the lines, and where do you have to strike that balance?
Thanks for the thoughtful question. You're getting right at what I most grapple with really in leadership of this office. And it is an art, not a science, and I can't say that I always get it right. I thought a lot about it before deciding prior to the inauguration of this presidential administration in making the decision to speak out about what I expected would be the coming firings, and ultimately decided that it wasn't a partisan critique. And that I was uniquely well situated as someone who's insulated and separated from the federal system to be able to say some of what I expected to happen, and then of course ultimately did happen. So not everyone might agree with that calculus, but I thought it was important that someone who really understood the issues take those positions and do so in a way that's thoughtful and ideally as nonpartisan as one can be in this environment. With respect to how to better bring the public in and not be overly expository, my thoughts on it come from kind of being part of the history of the evolution of the social presence of law enforcement agencies. And when I started at the district attorney's office in 2006, it was really a black box, as so many prosecutors' offices were. And the idea was that the district attorney's job was to deal with the press and the public, and we as line prosecutors were not to even consider the implications of our casework. And I came to think, as the technology changed, the public's expectations changed, and my own practice and experience changed, that that wasn't quite the right way for me to be thinking about it. That of course a line prosecutor shouldn't be thinking about messaging per se, but should be aware that everything they are saying is representative of the office, and ultimately that they're answerable to the people. And that is kind of a fine line, but that actually every ADA has to walk it. And you know, when I was first at the DA's office during the development of social media platforms, there was a categorical ban on anyone being on social media. And so I was actually kind of late to the game on some of that, thinking about and experimenting with that. But when I came to the DA's office, and especially sort of in the wake of COVID, as things were, it was less, the world was less open. We were less able to go to community meetings and do the traditional kind of retail communication with the public. It became clear that there were real potential upsides to some of those tools. And so I had the wherewithal to hire a brilliant young person right out of college, who's now our director of external affairs, and have subsequently staffed up his office with another young person right out of college, who's also brilliant, who do our work of trying to translate what we do into something that we hope everyday New Yorkers can see and understand. And we've actually really doubled down on that this year in celebrating our 40th anniversary, in part because I was teaching a class at UAlbany last year. And instead of giving remarks, I started a conversation with about 30 government seniors to ask where they were getting their information about government. And it turned out that with the exception of one person, all of them received their information from what they called independent journalists on video streaming platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And that they did not communicate with state agencies themselves, and that they didn't seek news from traditionally trusted media outlets. So I then thought all the work that I did putting out, a dozen op-eds in the course of the year was only capturing a very small portion of the public that I'm committed to serving. And so we've developed a kind of a multi-tiered approach to how we think about bringing the public in. I mentioned our various social media platforms, which are iterative and sometimes silly, but also are very useful and have been mounting. And we now get complaints in through those channels as well, which is part of the goal. We have been working with the Office for the Aging to reach aging population, although we do know that they are much more likely to be getting news from traditional sources, which we have experience communicating through. And we have started to experiment this year, and we launched, this really was inspired by my time here this fall working on civics education, to build out a module on oversight that we pushed out this in early March during New York City's Civics Week, where we went to a number of schools throughout New York City to talk about oversight, take questions, market our internship program. And that's designed for high school, for high school juniors and seniors, that classroom component. We have built out a pretty robust internship program for late high school, college, and law school students, and are now working to build out some programming for middle school and early high school students that will include the development of a youth advisory council. We'll be identifying interested youth from around the state and convening over the course of a semester to talk about issues in civics, to educate them about oversight. And it's twofold, really, that it enables us to do our work better when we're bringing people in, but also I felt this real sense of crisis and obligation after the wonderful day that I spent here on Constitution Day this fall, thinking about how we are not adequately building the bench for the future of public servants. So it's also in the interest of making sure that someone keeps up Social Security when I'm up there and need it, you know? Yes.
Hi, I'm here because I have a very unique perspective gained recently. I was the victim of a very violent crime on January 3rd this year. I'm 72 years old. I was assaulted in Macy's. I ended up with a broken hip, a broken wrist. I spent 12 days in the hospital. What I never disclosed to anybody throughout my whole journey is that I'm also an attorney. In fact, a New York Law School graduate and with an LLM and a JD. I kept quiet through the whole thing. The abuse of the system through the DA's office, through the judge, through everything that has happened to me is staggering. Okay, I recently sent your office a letter, and I find it appalling that the woman who assaulted me, who was 24 years old and didn't know me, was let go on a felony misdemeanor, on a misdemeanor, when it was a clear felony assault due to the fact that I was of my age and that I had to undergo surgery and was in the hospital for 2 weeks. But what really disgusted me was the entire failure of the legal system. And I think I have a very unique experience being an attorney, a very skilled attorney, went through all of this and kept silent and saw every step that went wrong, including now the only recourse I've been given, although I have no job at the moment, I can't get the medical care I need as follow-up, is I'm now embroiled in the workers' comp system, which is even more corrupt. So I just thought I would have a unique perspective that might be interesting to you, because very few attorneys find themselves in my position.
I'm so sorry that you've been through that, and thank you for sharing your story. And it's really interesting that you had the opportunity to almost inadvertently go undercover as a lawyer as you were experiencing these system failures. And this unfortunate thing, of course, is that you're not alone, that so many people experience failures by the complicated net of systems that we've designed to try to support people. And I'm sorry to hear that it's failed you.
Well, more interestingly, I'm not here to complain. I'm interesting to say I think that I have a unique perspective that's
Yeah.
worth exploring, because I deliberately kept silent about being an attorney because I didn't think it would work for me. And I also did phenomenal amounts of research every step of the way. I went through all the underlying statutes and everything. The fact that the police took extensive reports, there was video, not one thing, there was never a trial. Okay, I think that the complete failure of the system, in my case, and probably many others who don't have their eyes wide open like I did, is something worth investigating. And I would ask that your office look into this, because it's a rare person, like you said, who goes undercover in a sense, not deliberately, and ends up where I ended up, but eyes wide open.
Thank you for sharing that.
May I jump in just one second? The questioner, I didn't get your name, said that the workers' compensation system is entirely corrupt. And I didn't want to let that just pass, because that's part of your mandate. And I wonder if you just speak to how you see the workers' compensation system.
The workers' compensation system is a bedrock system dating back to the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. You know, it exists for very good reasons to protect workers. And New York has been the leading state on workers' compensation related issues. Like any system, there is opportunity for abuse. And we see that very clearly in the State Department of Correction, that that folks are able to go out on leave and still receive pay even when they haven't been injured. And interestingly, with respect to that department, and our provisions are very different from those that are that New York City corrections officers are subjected to. The state provisions allow people, don't require people to stay home. They are permitted to go about their business. So they're hard cases to investigate as compared to if, say, an NYPD officer is injured and out receiving their version of workers' comp. They are, people can just go in and check on them, make sure they're home and not out and about skiing or what have you. And it's actually a joke in the North Country of New York that and Western New York, that workers' compensation callouts in the prisons peak right before Buffalo Bills games and before the start of hunting season. There's no doubt that they're being abused, but as I said, there's kind of lack of fail-safes to facilitate easy investigation in those cases. So certainly there is opportunity for corruption, but by and large, that system exists to support injured workers and does do just that. I will be presenting our annual report to the Workers' Compensation Board next week in Schenectady. And those of you who are particularly interested in that niche issue are invited to tune in. It'll be live streamed.
I'll
Let's
just
go to-
add from the
sorry.
other side if I can.
Let's go to the next question. I'm sorry.
Well, this is about workers' comp, and
No,
I'd
but
like
let's
to.
go to this next
If you want,
question,
I would
please.
direct you to my colleagues.
I had a different question, but the last one provoked an even better one. Small businesses in New York State, including those that have but a single employee, are required to pay unemployment insurance premiums, which they can never collect on because you can't fire yourself, making the state the biggest fraudulent operator of insurance fraud in the state. Do you have a comment on that?
It's an interesting take on it. I would say that I'm glad you asked because it raises a bigger issue about IGs that I think maybe is not all oversight officials agree on, which is about taking positions on policy. And as a general matter, I don't take positions on the merits of policy. I think that that's the job for the legislature, but that we do investigate every allegation of fraud and abuse, and we look for systemic failures to try to identify trends. So I'm interested to hear your perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just see, some of the other people who might, Jessica, do you have any comment or anybody would like to, I'm a professor, so I call on people.
Cold call.
But there's a number of people who had wide experience. Bart, a comment on, Bart Schwartz from, any comment on corruption? And Anthony, are you on the microphone? There we go.
Our guests are welcome to speak
Okay.
before me. Please.
The mic if you feel like it. If you feel like it, this is not a graded event.
I was a student assistant for Ross in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the 1970s, and he's still asking me questions.
And you're still answering.
Right, well, I'll try. Actually, it has something a little different, and that is, as a former prosecutor, I wonder what are the different channels you have where information comes to you that you determine whether you need to investigate or what the issues are.
It's a good question, and it is an evolving response. The very first Inspector General, Joe Spinelli, who some of you will know, who is a real New York treasure, when he was appointed the first IG, he set up a hotline, and he tells the story that very early on, he's in his office in Albany, and the hotline rings, and it's a reporter, and they said, can I set up a time to meet with the IG? And he said, I am the IG. And they said, the IG answers his own hotline. He said, I'm also my own secretary. He was the only member of the office. Took a while for us to get staffed up. But Spinelli, in his infinite wisdom, got our hotline number, which is 1-800-DO-RIGHT. And I think it's such a brilliant and catchy thing to push out to the public. And so we get in the bulk of our complaints through the hotline. We get them in through the website, increasingly through our various social media platforms. We take complaints in person. And as I mentioned, some of those docs investigations came out of conversations that I had speaking with incarcerated folks just while I was walking around prisons. We also open sort of sua sponte investigations based on something we may read in the newspaper, or if we see something during the course of a routine inspection that doesn't feel quite right. We could be undertaking infinite investigations and reviews and that kind of thing. So it's always a question of where are we going to direct our precious resources? And I hope that some of what I said spelled out a little bit about how we think about the ways in which we want to have impact using our limited resources available. Hello.
Good morning, General. Pat Russo, I've spent now 29 years in the IG community, starting at the Welfare IG's office and then most recently at the Department of Investigation as an Inspector General and part of Dan Court's MTA IG Advisory Board. And I'm struck by one thing after 29 years.
One thing?
One thing specifically, it goes back to von Steuben. The more things change, the more they seem to be the same. And we dealt with a lot of insurance fraud cases, and that's the crisis of the day that's being discussed. And I know you're not going to speak on policy. So I guess we are able to hit in the IG community the climate of a place, but how do you change the culture? And what I'm asking is, what do you see as the biggest challenge to your role as an Inspector General to change the culture within the state, within an organization? Because we hear the same things repeatedly. The insurance fraud scams that are at the heart of the Albany budget discussion seems to be stuff that, well, I was working on nearly 30 years ago.
You've heard that story before.
Mm-hmm.
There's good scholarship out of Oxford in the international anti-corruption context about how in creating a culture of integrity in businesses or in agencies really starts with the integrity of the oversight authorities. So we've done a lot of internal work, and this is really the unsexy part of leadership, of course. I'm really glad to be joined by my chief of staff, who actually is responsible for the remarkable work that we have done on culture change internally to the IG's office. And that is unglamorous stuff like performance evaluations and 360 reviews and trying to right-size salaries, working on issues related to our facilities, including how far people have to work from their parking spot. All of those things that really do impact how people feel about their job and frankly impact their job performance. And the scholarship shows that when an oversight agency has a better culture, that it tends to be better able to effectuate change in the related or the agencies they're overseeing. So we're doing our part to try to lead by example. In terms of leveraging our actual work to create culture change, I like to think that the report on domestic violence had to have had some impact, because now all of the agencies have to annually have everyone on their staff review the policy and sign that they've done it. And you have to imagine that at some point that starts to change how people think about issues of domestic violence. But of course, there's a limit to how much we can actually manage change in 100 discrete agencies and authorities. So we try to identify the really abysmal cultural problems, but also try not to be HR. And I'm sure that you've had this experience in your many, many years, that we get a fair number of complaints that when we really dig into them, it turns out this person really just dislikes their boss. And maybe the boss is not doing a terrific job of lifting them up, but there's not corruption happening here. And so being able to separate that out from where we think there's actually either a criminal case or some kind of real systemic issue that we may be in a position to help address is a core part of the job.
Thank you.
So thanks for today's conversation. It's been terrific. And I actually very much applaud the work you've done on social media. Really educating the public is so critical when it comes to the work of an inspector general, which I often think is largely either not really understood by the public or misunderstood by the public. And so I applaud that. And what we do in our work together with civics is critical to ensuring that the public knows. But I have a problem. And
Talk to me.
I need your help. Every day, people talk to me about what is the law school doing about the impact of artificial intelligence on the profession, on government, on the corporate world, on society. What are your words in terms of what law school should be doing in terms of preparing its students for a world that is heavily influenced by AI? And how is AI shaping the way you go about crime fighting?
Well, you may have inferred from some of my remarks that my sort of side hustle interest is in higher ed. So
Yes.
I have been thinking a lot about how higher ed is going to manage in the face of this rapidly changing environment. I had the good fortune to be out at Stanford a couple of weeks ago, hearing from a number of professors there who are both developing policies internal to their classes to deal with the issues that AI is raising around academic integrity, but also who are leveraging artificial intelligence to try to augment their teaching. And I was struck by the extent to which so many students now don't actually think of the use of artificial intelligence as cheating, that they think of it very much as a tool, to the point that many professors have, as I don't have to tell you, have had to return to in-class paper assignments in order to avoid the interference of or reliance on artificial intelligence. I think that the promise is tremendous, and we are embarking on some major thinking about how we can leverage AI in fraud fighting. Because you can imagine that the work that our outstanding auditors do day in and day out, some measure of it can be really augmented by artificial intelligence. We take in a tremendous amount of information, from financial records to time and leave information, about thousands and thousands and thousands of employees. And of course, we've automated some things, but we know that there are generative AI tools that can apply to help us better identify trends that then will still require a human eye to help us try to determine where to direct our resources, as I was saying. So I think that law schools that are shying away from it are disadvantaging their students, and I know that that's not happening here. But to me, it is just a further example of the critical importance that higher ed be thinking of themselves as raising ethical citizens who are able to think critically. Because by the time you have graduation on May 18th, right, by the time your 3Ls start their jobs in September, the technology will be dramatically different and improved. So you can't possibly position them to be able to hit the ground running with all the tools that will be available to them then, and then as the years in their career progress. But you can do as you always have done, which is teaching them to think critically about what's available to them, to look at things from both sides, to make sure that they're following the rules, and where there's a reason not to, that they are surfacing it and handling it and evaluating it and dealing with it in an appropriate way with leadership. So I don't have any brilliant wisdom on it other than to say that it's here. And I think it's exciting, because the alternative is that we all just have to go put our heads under our pillows.
Well, thanks for the validation. We are doing a lot, and it is a journey, and we'll figure it out together. So thanks.
You bet.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for the thoughtful questions. I'm sorry I had to ask, but we had time, and it was really important to get the more information, that we had this wonderful opportunity. I learned a lot, and what I also learned was that our commissioner has both great curiosity and an instinct for innovation. And I think this is really quite remarkable. One of the nice things about these breakfasts is you learn about the people who are holding office, and I think we've all learned a lot. As we like to do, we like to give a book to our guests, and this is about the man who graduated from this law school, Samuel Seabury, the man who rode the tiger. Not exactly an inspector general, but a wonderful investigator, and a great story. And we give it to thanks for your remarks today and for your good work as inspector general. Thank you so much. Thank you all. We'll see you at our next breakfast. Thank you so much for coming. It was a terrific talk.